about these ideas, and I'd like to welcome us to a conversation about all of the material that we've encountered today. And there's a few sort of key issues that seem to have arisen from the conversations and the presentations and the discussions that we've had. And one of them that I thought it would be interesting to begin with at this hour is this question about individual application of practices. And what I mean by that is, in the contemplative traditions, it seems like practices are passed from a teacher to a student. The teacher gets to know the student and understands what they need and what will be most helpful for them. And this is a way that the practices are most beneficial. In the West, we have tried to take practices and deliver them in a more broad way to many people and try to understand if they're helpful. But we don't have as much information about how to tailor a specific practice to a specific person. And we don't have the relationships between highly practiced teachers and students. So what can we do to be better at tailoring, at finding the right practices for the right person at the right time? So that's a question for the geshes in the audience, in the panel, and all.
지자 다나슈기 건주 트두르치데 디나로는 케체직 아니 곰다든 주기 아니 단다 롭티체 kapsla 아니 미수수수 아니 투몽기 다 제주 만다위 겸질 때네 곰 만다 다 펜도요 만다 용기요레스 지자 다 수준기 아니 곰다든 주기 제시 인도 선바다 라만 로메기 대와세 제다 라메기 로메기 감도 메발 때체 아니 곰디치쇼세 셰저로 지자 다 노브조기 지토나는 데데 메와제 아니 콘주기 딘데기 곰기 냠네 치라바직 수에제 아니 마 랍가도야 디네 차디 요르스 제자 다 딘데 기겐다 기투 랄롭시기네레 다 노브졸임베나 아니 단단 세릭 바수기 코란수기 마 쥐탑지스기 아니 지 곰체 중이 죽세기 아니 네버딘조기 아니 니주 야고 신도 유야라 카르카체 요레스타 디 군인이 파르긴 데와디 야르 칸스탄 투레스고
다디 게기 삼주시에와이노라 디지당 내당 코나 빼깔 갖고 지차서다 가지나 단다 코랑 시에와나 신제 에네 라마다 로메 파르긴 데위 규네 바주 강이 디세르지기요로 디즘바 양 라마 로메 파르긴 데와 두고레 라마 싱자치 무지고레 신예 된주 고르라나 양 코라스 라마 체도 치기도 양디 타와닝비 계절란 디 계절 리고르와 딘zambal라 딘 리고마 딘zam바 양 키시 베신 신예 된주디 에 낭베기 지기 규름이나 람냠랭 림베 낭론 개충한 로지나 다디 바피쇼 딜 개시 코냠스렘 바이나 애니 양 디기 덤벤데 비지 코디 참도 고추르라 딘데지 양 시에추고 다 신인 딘줄레 zambal라 요네메나 개치유 제거레 람기 자와 차고레 다 디니 바 모고 딜리 셴바지 골레 zam발 라와zam기다 깔레카고 람가 레사다 다 간다 원디지 삼고다 디즈마다 탐람 가리요 라와이나다 녜잉을 삼주신다 디 간다 힘주 치사기 이나레다 네바 이나레 코나 강이 유사디다 강이 세탑 징행기 네 체리바 이나레 코나니 바로 센탄 요차고야디 다 기체슈지레서 보니.
So this problem is kind of a basic very basic kind of problem, and it is very difficult to solve, and we could not have possibly say that, oh, if you do this, then we're going to solve this. Because when we talk about, in our spiritual tradition, when we talk about the relationship between teacher and the student, or and that aspect of our tradition we called Guru Yoga, and it is the most important aspect of spiritual practice to get fully enlightened. So in Buddhism, when you are given a choice between two things, then sometimes like you have to choose the more important and can abandon the lesser important part. But when you talk about the Guru Yoga or the teacher-student relationship, it is the most important. If you abandon this one, then there's no way that you can fully, I think, enlightened. And so it's difficult to say. But according to Western perspective, the best possibility that we can have is from the scientific order, those who are treating the patients. They try to know more things about, better understand the patients, and I see that is the only option.
Shall I add on something on this, more or less in the same line? Because in Buddhism, when we do the practice of the Dharma, it is for eliminating destructive negative emotions. And so therefore, when you rely upon a teacher, or when you engage in the Dharma practice, you need to see what is wrong with you. You consider yourself as almost like a sick person. And the Dharma is like a medicine. And the teacher is seen as a physician or the doctor. So just as in the actual real life, when somebody is hospitalized and sick, then the doctor really has to pay a lot of attention to that sick person. So similarly, the teacher has to be with the student to see what is his problem, which of the negative emotions are more predominant, and so forth. So I think this is one reason why this close relationship between the teacher and the student is needed. And then second point is, as we have been saying, Buddhism is more focused towards internal development. Science is more towards external development. So I'm tempted to give an example like external construction. If you do an external construction, let us say a 3-story building, I can construct up to the 2nd story. Then if I'm very busy, I can request my friend, I'm very busy, can you please continue constructing the 2nd and the 3rd? So that can be done in the case of the external construction. But in the case of the internal construction, I cannot say I have meditated for 1 year in developing compassion, now I'm tired, please continue after me. I can't say that. So I have to do that. So you are the main focus. Not only that, when you are unable to continue, then you need to rely on teacher, not only anybody, but somebody who has really undertaken that internal journey and who has the experience. So again, here you can clearly see the importance of that close relationship between the teacher and the student.
So let me ask that question in a little bit of a different way. If the average person, and this is someone who doesn't aspire to find enlightenment, but only aspires to be a little bit happier and maybe have a little bit less of the destructive emotions, is it possible to use some of the insights and the practices from Buddhism to achieve that without a guru, or do we need to have the guru relationship?
No, you don't need. If you look at this word Dharma basically means law of nature. So to do Dharma practice in a broader sense means to live in accordance with the law of nature. So if you just take out this label called Buddhism, the messages contained in the teaching of the Buddha can be practiced by anybody, except when you enter into the tantric practice. Again, Tantra is called secret, not because there are some mistakes and you need to hide it from other people, but unless you rely on a really, really experienced master, you might, get entrapped in various pitfalls. Instead of helping you, it might harm you because you are handling these subtle energies and, So because of that risk, we say that you need to follow certain line. Otherwise, the basic teachings, anybody can practice.
I'm not sure how this question is going to fall, but let's try it anyway as an experiment. So we talked a little bit after my talk about potential pitfalls of meditation and sort of the very, very preliminary work that's being done in the West to figure out what kind of pitfalls there are. But maybe could you share some of your perspectives on what pitfalls there might be in meditation?
Gom se di chevimbina kangi manda kangi de the series ke che tanji chungsos che zata gom se di gomdang nor wimbe na yamena ta gomdan dewe ki kangi kharkha the series tizu tol ne pe de chayu bes
당아서 곰 라이디 셰드가라 단다 딩예기 깨져되는 게 춘 디시기라 딩예되는 건 저기 곰제디 라말라 된 거를 라이다 디망고 시에서 다지당 얘기 상가랑 게 삼절 당하라 계획 삼절라 간라는 신의 라이다 아니 우중목이 곰에서 디수수 네발라 아니 펜토게나 디치샤나 믹스에 개통문도 간라는 신의 라이디 믹스에게 가서 낭비해 주시게 통매 말아갈래나 네 야간을 망고슈도 신의 공개다 전반 예샤 공개다 우중의 공개다 야간은 힌두나는 요래 네 시라기 개발 개통문도 아니바디 단다 곰자네 아니 셈 투바다 인데 용거여를 라야 된도 네 용거여레스 곰자네 삼로 야부당 마시나 아니 셈 투데 녀바라서 망보여레스 맞아 다 하고 살다 가시 참데 아니 녀바 창에데 가시 통해여라 근데 요레스 네 갈라나 냠네 지나 마신바다 라마 냠뇨제지 뒤에 매배 왕기 아니 소속이 아니 곰자당다 인데 추배 왕기 근데 용구여레스 아니 단다 겐 바지 소야나시레 곰자도 라마라 땡고 라이디 라마 냠뇨지는 땡바이나 아니 캐나 딜레 두가라 뇨와 딜리기레 딜레도 따다 코치도 이레스 소소 라마 냠뇨제지 매바체 소소 라니기 다 구조지를 곰자바이나 아니 소소 셈랑 감다게 와다 아니 뇨바 차와라서 망보 용구여레스
One kind of comment is that in the morning and also the whole day we talk about the importance of and the positive effects of meditation techniques like shamatha, mindfulness, and breathing attentions. If you find any kind of positive effects, I don't see that there's no reason to not practice this kind of training programs. When we talk about the shamatha and these meditational practices, these are not unique to Buddhist philosophical traditions, because you can find this kind of meditational practices across the Indian culture and the Indian philosophical traditions. And then the second part is that when you talk about these pitfalls of meditation, yes, there can be many pitfalls related with not properly going through the procedures of the meditation. So that's why we talk about the importance of this guru or the trainer and the teacher in our traditions. And if you do not have experience, spiritual guidance, then you may fall into these pitfalls. And from our experience, we can see people who are doing meditation and go completely mental. And so this is the reason why you need to have experienced teacher. And so with experienced teacher, based on his own experiences, then he can understand which stages you are and what kind of mental state you are and what kind of negative emotions are arousing in you, and then he can accordingly advise you to do what you need to do.
So in the West, I think we have a problem that we don't have a large population of experienced spiritual teachers, particularly in the contemplative traditions. Our teachers are usually only for academics, and so it's something we have to think about. I have another question from which is inspired by Marik's statements while she was giving her presentation, which was that one of the effects she observes in her own spiritual practice and in the people her community, her sangha, is an increase in humor and a willingness to take oneself less seriously. And in the happiness science, literature on happiness, there's also evidence that humor and laughter are important for well-being. And I wonder what the Buddhist perspective is on humor and laughter and its role in happiness and well-being.
Since nobody is speaking, I will venture into the risky zone. No, I mean, you cannot force smile or laughter. Laughter and smile has to come from within. When there is inner stability, inner calmness, inner happiness, when the way you see everything is in a pure, harmonious form, naturally the laughter will be spontaneous, smile will be spontaneous. So therefore, again, it's like going back to square one. It's really more about the happiness than the outcome, you see. And the happiness, one point that's really important here to mention is particularly from the Buddhist viewpoint, the real source of happiness is cultivating a holistic viewpoint of everything. I think this is an area we need to do more exploration, because what I found during many of the discussions is, like in the West, we talk so much about specialization, which of course is very important. There's no denying the fact. But sometimes specialization is like knowing everything about nothing. Sometimes it looks like that. Or sometimes specialization looks like patchwork solution. You see, you have a broken part here, fix it. Don't think about the rest of the body, okay? The Buddhist viewpoint is, no, if there's something wrong here, don't just focus here, pay attention to here, but not only here. Something may be wrong somewhere, probably in the mind, in the brain. So have that holistic viewpoint. I think that also is very important. I'm not saying which one is more important, but I'm saying this holistic viewpoint is really, really important. Because if you don't have that holistic viewpoint, today you meet this guy, you will be very, very happy. Tomorrow you meet this guy, you will be totally upset, you see. So therefore it's important to know the universal law of nature which relates to everything. Like for example, when we say impermanence, it's not talking about just you or me, it's talking about everything that is conditioned as impermanent. If anything is impermanent, then this will be the aspect, this will be the condition. So you are prepared for that. Everyone is subject to death. If you are prepared for that, you will not be surprised by the death of your family members or other things. And if you don't have that understanding, then when you see somebody dying, then you say, oh, it's no problem, everybody dies, don't worry about it. But when it's your family member's turn, then you are unable to know that, you see. Because deep in your heart you have this feeling, the others are going to die, not me, you see. So that is kind of misplaced practice. So this holistic viewpoint, I think, is one very important feature in the Buddhist approach, from where the more reliable happiness has to come.
Yeah, actually that brings up a really important point that we also talked about during the workshop, which is that on the one hand, I think it's really important to come up with these almost atomic sort of models of the mind and be very precise, because it's a very good sort of exercise in thinking very precisely. So if you don't do that, sometimes if you think too holistically, then you might gloss over some important distinctions that are there. But at the same time, you should never forget that it's just a model. And that's what we do for a living as a scientist. We just try to make simplification. So we come up with some laboratory task that's really, in a way, pretty meaningless. It's a very narrow abstraction of reality. It's simple enough that we can actually make statements about it and make inferences about it. But at the same time, of course, it is just an abstraction. And it's always important to take a step back and say, okay, well, this is just one aspect of reality, and there is also the full experience, which is much wider. So it's important to switch back and forth, I think.
Given this opportunity and the panel, I have a question that's been coming up again and again over the time that I've been here. And it has to do with another part of my work, which is substance use. So a lot of people from my work, it seems, use substances to achieve an altered state of mind. And a lot of that is to cope with their experience, their difficulties. So people, as an example, people who have experienced a traumatic event may use a substance so that they can feel better and live their lives in a more, within themselves, feel better through this process. I've also just recently been aware and talked to some people who are using specific drugs to achieve a state that otherwise normally only comes about from meditation and compassionate practices. So my question is, this is presented as kind of an easy way to experience these without going through all of the training and all of this. And they're showing that this is helpful for people. And so my curiosity is, what are your thoughts on substance use? And how do you think it can be beneficial or harmful? And I see both sides. But I'm curious to hear about that and how this plays into kind of the broader context of what we've been talking about.
Let me respond to this. When you say substance, it's a broad term. What kind of substance you are talking about? It has to be clear, because in Buddhism we say the power of substance is unthinkable. The power of mantra is unthinkable. The power of meditation is unthinkable. You know, there really has a lot of consequences and powerful effects. So that's explained in Buddhism. But when you talk about achieving that altered state of consciousness through different means, according to Buddhism, we aspire to achieve enlightenment, which basically means achieving the highest state of happiness. So in order to achieve that, the path that is taught is a systematic process of training and meditation. That is in accordance with the law of nature. For example, if you look at the tree, you need to just give them time to grow at its own speed. You cannot say that I want the fruit quickly, so I will pull the tree or plant, you see. It will not help the tree grow. So the altered state of consciousness that you will achieve through using drugs or substances is actually, it again depends what kind of substance you are talking about, but many of these substances are really very harmful. And in fact, I would go to the extent of saying that we do not need more hallucinating substances because we are already hallucinated by the negative emotions, you see, by the negative emotions. So in a way, from Buddhist point of view, we are really, honestly speaking, we are not so in a normal state. That's why we constantly experience suffering, which we do not want, because we are totally controlled by the negative emotions. So you are hallucinated in that sense, you see. So now on top of that hallucination through the negative emotion, if you use more substances to hallucinate you more, it will make the matter worse. So therefore, my answer is that whether it is the highest form of happiness or enlightenment, there is no push button enlightenment. Okay? In the automatic age, we think that we will achieve everything by pushing the button, but that is not possible in the case of internal transformation. It looks like that, yeah.
So,
And gela is on the Zegi to Nebeja, Dagogi, Kapdan, the Yamita, Dread, and to Nambichun Mevachera. Then ye Karsam Gudulana, the Kirangi Gomda in the Majavach, Labjag to any pen to a some Hanana, Manzugi, Pena Michigi, Kalagasa, Kangido, Kangi Chuji Tedena, Kerala Kokangi chair, Dalan, Kol Lavana, so similar this de Uyo Nashitoa. Kazan to Gela Korana, Temaji Sonsa, and to Yanguruji Temaji Nushi, Pagi Gayani Pedugala, Pernan, and Yagajo Shutus. Yagajo Shutu, the Pagi Dungata, Sosu Dungata, the Pagitilla job capturing your Marikeguji made into some Sosu Dungachung to Sonsa. Dinashi, Keragi, Nebajosa, Neba Manguyori, Neba Manguy, the Chili Chikangi Chayra. 찌글찌 강에 쳐야 강이 충화되라 쳐야 되게 강에도 셔요나 충화도 강에 시루를 상고도스 아니 디 마제베 안 단도 강에 셔라 하면은 사우스 아프리카 칼라라고 메교 미교도 밥 빼셔요나 단도 편도를 상고도스
if when you try to treat the patients who are having a distress state of mind, if the meditation technique is not working, is too complex and too difficult, I think instead of using the drugs to alter the state of mind, one method that you can adopt is to give a proper advice about their state of nature. For example, when His Holiness mentioned this during one of the teachings, that some time back he was very sick in Bodh Gaya, and he was, I think, traveling, and on the road he saw very sick and poor people, poor person, and as soon as he has noticed that sick person on the road, his kind of own mental problems kind of become to eased. So when you treat patients in the hospital, they may have different patients who are having different kinds of problems. So you can talk about the patients who have more difficulties to the patients who are having lesser difficulties. And you can say, oh, look at these patients, they have more problems than you. As compared to them, you are in a better position, so you should not worry much. And for the worse patients who don't have a comparison, then you can take comparisons from the African continents. There are so many people who are suffering more than you, and you can take perspective from them. I think it will work.
I think that's a very, very interesting point, and it brings up a bigger question about social inequality. I think sometimes a point of resistance from the West when someone says, in order to improve your life and the life of everyone around you, the best thing to do is cultivate your inner spiritual life, become mindful, and have compassion and loving kindness. How can you spend any time doing that, knowing that down the street there is a child who is starving to death? So how do you sort of think about that tension between the people who have almost nothing and can't even, or only suffering, and the fortune of our freedom and ability to spend lots of time developing our inner lives, or seeking enlightenment?
Yes, kanjen gela de sonsa da nujo bala ini nyamni tidege ini nyamni da tin thobe yonjo ge mi ko basunda ini tidege chane kangye yoris de sonsa ani di ngaran de sans da bel chasha minale da mu thomani la bela nangbe che ko ra madaza nangbe che gi thong nyamni se de zawani ne tidege da kare ko da ndiri yebe zawani dawne yomaris ne shine gyagane ndris kebaris denji shuje an khali jeje an ta lo mangbu shibu chi ndege da rimbe jeje an tande ne gola benal kyo mangbu chi de rimbe chumres 제가 아니 늦어 발 차시들이 단단 남사 냠네 제들이 망부지 태 깔려 가버리네 심벨 럽촌제네 kalli mangbu the degi다 so yaris samjidi.
This is kind of a response to one of the previous cautions, and I think in response to one of the cautions you said that in the West you are having the difficulty of finding experienced teachers for the meditation. So for that, in the past, Tibet was not a Buddhist country. Buddhism was imported from India, and when Buddhism, we invited scholars, and when Buddhism come to Tibet, and with time it became part of our tradition. It became part of culture, and because of that, now these Buddhist practices and Buddhist meditation techniques are part of our culture and our social system, and we all find different various masters who are highly experienced in the Buddhist practices. And so now at this moment Buddhism is new to the Western culture, and because of that you are facing the difficulty finding teachers, and also difficulty people accepting this kind of trainings. So with time, I think you will get more and more experienced teachers and more acceptance from the people. Be patient.
I'm going to ask one other quick question. It gets back to the conversation where we started on pitfalls. And I think I'm still left wondering a little bit about specificity. So what specific pitfalls there are to meditation practice if it's done incorrectly. And I'll ask a specific question here. So is it possible that one pitfall of meditation could be, and this is again with my other research hat, addiction to meditation? So there's a lot of good behaviors that people do in excess, and without which they're unhappy. Exercise is a good example. So there's been recent study of exercise. Exercise is a good thing, but some people cannot live without exercise. Can this happen similarly with meditation? And how does one deal with that?
Gom che mashi bimbena kangi gad khati resi samata nyodoya da dire kangi mangush thi yore siguro te gilansu peji shatu service gom chida pa dinde chidan dinde nor bimbena kangi de yungre da se ki peshan she tu service te ana shi ani nubjol khari yore slav bimbena lega imbenre chawa khari bimbena namgyu yago imbena yago dinzola ya ani addict sidu sambola ani khumgyur theche dimena de matoya dine yung yore specha shavimbena luje ya se di yakuros mi khaje ani luje se di khumti theche da luje maze vimbena kyu me wacha do ya de matoya dine kangi thig yores chiso dilla sambola kirton gom se de yakbo imbena ani de ani dinde ki ani khumgyur theche jela ani ta ma gom chi magena kyu mindu se dine ani chaya ka kangi yosi re mare these all chik sumronas
dinge samju shin jina nangba rangi shen zamba jidang da chawa nganzhou cha xiao ina tanda budu peja ta den ma do gomgi kol khoder da ma do nyamnyo xiu ge yo mar da ngarang genzhou cha xiao ina ina peshina gomgi kangi jig xiao ina ni kar ko nyu sena ni migba te dang che xiao ina ni den den ji jing mu da migba jig ya to chawa ina sem pa char dro da ya migba ma chawa ina sem du dro 간다 원딘데 강요 다든죠 딩에 군이 다딩아 땡리지 팀 간다 미고 토장네 딩 좀발라 고 간다 개인지 마라트 공에서는 딘데 강이지도 왔다 간다 아니 단다 루지젠나 데마토라데 찍니다 검시찬 아니 딱 균네 딱바디 제대도 아니 드링디 체송 삼삼 손날래다 딘데들레 쇼르마도 베시나 드럭스당 두두 에텍차 나시 강이지 트리르상 문도 찍제라 이바디 낭주 낭 단답이신 낭도 배규 낭den기 이네 곰갱 망친 로지까지 로숨 주선에 된 되고 봐. 디sem발라 이네 신이 고미야 라디sem발라 지당 계신부터 찍고 봐. 이네 신이 고랑 고미야 섬다오이나 신이 유림이야 곰조이나 아니 신이 튕이바 고랑 톱인 sem발라 이네 신장의 대화는 톱인 때 지당 딩원 계시야 신이다. sem발 디 고랑라 차안조네 이네 눈들리기 요르란 따디다수 디요르다. 디다수 유상 아니 신이 샘지지과 코랑라 슈마게부 공라 아니 레균데 코로님이 아니 겨왕같이 dunzu강라 아니 삼로 망부지 땅에 잠발라 제라 수수 띵이진이 귤이 깨와 있나 데라 현자 마게네 강에 dunzu 마치야 된데 아니 땅 따당디 요장니 대지 곰비진 바도 된지 시당 요르다 간다.
So Rinpoche was basically saying some kind of addiction is possible in the spiritual practice also. For example, in the case of meditation on shamat or calm abiding, it is said when you pass through these various spiritual stages of achieving that one-pointed concentration, which leads to that shamat, calm abiding, when you reach there, a very special experience called pliancy is produced. Suppleness of the body, a feeling of ecstasy is produced. And then it is possible that you get too attached to it, to that, pleasurable feeling, and you want to stay there continuously without moving forward, you see. So that is a kind of addiction. So therefore it is advised that before you do such practices, you should equip yourself with other preliminary practices like proper understanding of the law of causality, bodhicitta, karma, or whatever, all those needed prerequisite practices must be done. So let me give you another example on this, because this is a very important point. So I will mention 2 points. One which you asked earlier about the process of meditation. One thing that I really wanted to say and share is that these days the word meditation has become very romantic. It hits the headlines of newspaper, famous journals, and it's done in 5-star hotels. So it's become very fashionable. But unfortunately, not many people know the purpose of meditation. So it is important to bring it a little bit down and to understand the actual meaning of meditation. Meditation is definitely not equal to sitting in a corner, close the eye, and without moving back straight. No. The Tibetan word for meditation means gom, which means getting habituated, getting familiar. Getting habituated with what? Negative emotions? No. Because we are already highly advanced in negative emotion. We are great meditators in negative emotion. So therefore it clearly shows, as one of the Tibetan teachers says, you are controlled by your mind. Not a big deal. Your mind is predominantly controlled by negative emotions. That's the problem. So what you need to do now is, instead of making your mind continuously habituated with negative emotions, make your mind habituated with positive emotions. That anybody can do, anywhere, without sitting, while walking, while drinking, Be mindful, whether it's good for you, not good for others, good for others, good for you. So whichever is really beneficial temporarily, in the long run, we need to get habituated. Our mind has to get habituated with those kind of things. So that is really the best kind of meditation, which will really transform your whole life. Then regarding the pitfalls of the meditation, 2 important points must be noted when you do the meditation. When you do the meditation, the 2 things which is absolutely necessary, that is mindfulness and conscientiousness. Mindfulness means making your mind stay on the chosen object. Conscientiousness means to see what is happening, like a watchman, who is coming, who is going. So these 2 things must be there. So if you have these 2 things, then there will be no addiction. If you don't have these 2 things, probably you might end up doing a facsimile meditation, facsimile virtuous practice, not the real virtuous practice. Let me tell you one story, which is a very convincing story. There was an Indian meditator, very famous Indian meditator called Udrak in ancient times, Udrak by the name. It is said that his one-pointed meditation was so strong that he could just focus on one thing and stay days on without being distracted. So much so that once he was meditating in a cave, meditating for several days, I don't know how many days, probably months, it is said that his hairs grew long and he never tended it, completely oblivious of it. And the rats visiting his caves, they chewed off the ends of his hair, still oblivious. Once he got up from the meditation, so that the end of his hairs has been cut off by the rats, he got so angry. See, his concentration was good, but there was no insight, no consciousness. So anger came back, negative emotions came back. So I think this story is very useful for you. It was very useful for me.
Thank you. That was a very useful story. We have a similar story in the West when people sometimes take a 8-day Vipassana silent retreat, and then it's finished, and they go home and they drive and they get angry. They scream at the other driver who gets in their way. I have another question, which has to do with the importance of a sangha or a community in the benefits of meditation. So many of the ways that we deliver the meditation practices in the West involve a class of 25 or 30 people all together meeting and talking with each other and meditating together in the same room. And when we were down at Sara, in the mornings and the evenings, everybody came into the room and did their chanting together. So how important is it to have that community for receiving the benefits of these kinds of spiritual practices? Is it necessary, or can we do it by a computer, by ourselves?
제가 고생했어. 제가 높죠도 라카리오스 라빈바나 곰 지두잠벌 지단직 아니 곰 칭에 상마수 소제 아니 소간직 나로로 냠도 곰게 야 주주직 제라 아니 곰네 소 트여제 아니 소소소 그 냠뉴도 파조 셰레제 체데 데네조레스 냠망아조 탄다사라 sabjonda dende kapslimbe 아니 ngagon도 직 냠도 좀체 곰게 데네 지기 와스 첸도 교리하다 데네 제자다 데네 아니 직 냠도 좀체 아니 곰게다 첸도 교리하 든조 믹시 고바케 여르베스 제가 인지 제 고야지레 야메나 수수직부 대제 곰게 되는 데 여르베스
단다 곰디 기실하기 됐다고 실송서 다 단다 모랑기 라이디 다셈 조금 딜라기 있어요 다 지당 가서 곰게 긴디 뒤바 아니 초제 곰게 라이디 가족이 퇴섬 곰숨게 아니 퇴바다 300골라 디치고레스 가서 제곰다 디스마 아니 긴디 뭐 초와이나 디야가 이랬어 나라기 삼주시는 다 조금 라이디 다 지바이나 미직지구지 아니 술 줘나 아니 디야가도 삼고도스
In our tradition, we talk about this analytical meditation, and we talk about single-pointed meditation. So if you are doing single-pointed meditation, then it is better to do it by yourself. And if you are doing analytical meditation, then it's better to have your colleagues and other practitioners meditating together.
Let me add one quotation. Dubna chimdu neja tarbayu pagwe jalwe marwa laso hi madub ringor neja ngesongju chibasai khungbur samje hi. You know Tibetan? So this quotation says, if you practice, even if you remain as a householder, there is liberation. If you don't practice, even if you isolate yourself and stay high up in the mountain, there is no liberation, just like the marmot. The animal marmot hibernates for 6 months alone, high up in the mountain, no liberation. So this shows, practice can be done together and can also be done alone. So the emphasis is doing it. Yeah.
I have another sort of cross-cultural question, maybe. So one of the words for mindfulness is, I think, smriti in Sanskrit, which has a connotation of memory. And now I've talked quite a bit about memory in terms of these tasks, where we either remember lists of words, or we have to keep in mind some kind of an image and then answer questions about it. Is there any relationship between those two concepts, between, I guess, the mindfulness that's being referred to in that word smriti, or I think it's also drempa in Tibetan, right? Is there any relation between that concept and our Western sort of tasks of memory that we've talked about?
지난게 누조베게 전반이 시아스데 컨디션이 왜냐 그스네 레몬선스 셉제 하공스라 나네 저 남부상급이 전반이 시아시스데 지마 지단기 남 군주기 원데 시험이나 청람 중요 것으로 전반이 시아지 냠니디 고즈여봐 Edi sonda anzu number sang ba she de zamba da jamba ni sha shi na ne bina da lu jamba ni bar sha ba da she bina ni zo di ani yun de cha di nyem bo che do ani lu mi zang so ko ye gi che shi do zo ani lu da jamba ni bar sha din de gi cha ne gung yor ba da na shi ani kare chowa jamba ni bar sha ba si de chowa jamba ni bar si da chowa de wa ni cha dung ye 다 발마 가르 중배 있는 디양 어디 그래다 추신기 동분의 권님부메베人心 고동에게人心 어디게 차려 아니 삼도도에 어디게 차려지 시행 거봐 당나시 아니 쌤다 전반에 버셔 지금 봐 아니 근데 우지원을 써봐 되게 토네 아니 그래 아다 소디 생기 또봐 락베기 차도 봐 시월지 다 되게 차네 시행이 봐 아니 당나시 최 전반에 버셔 봐서 시에도 아니 최 탐제는 다 정신만 줘봐 대범만 줘봐 다 주마다 밀람 다 딘제기 전에 아니 그래 냠내제도 당한테 남배선에서나 딘제체는 시거래서 일단 컨저 늦어배 전반에 시 공부여서 가르 공부여배 셉시 하고 맞습니다.
I'll translate what she said, plus I'll add my own. Because there was a little bit miscommunication, because she was talking about mindfulness on a higher level. And what you are asking is not necessarily on a higher level. You are simply asking the relevance of mindfulness in Tibetan culture or Western culture. So here, what is important is to know the meaning of mindfulness. The definition of mindfulness means to remember an object that you are familiar with before. Okay? To remember that. To remember something means that you already know that object. So recall that object. To recalling that object, I think, is something like mindfulness. So therefore, now what you are going to be mindful? A positive experience, negative experience. Positive qualities or destructive emotions. If it is a harmful, destructive emotions, no need to maintain mindfulness. If it is a positive emotion, you need to make your mind repeatedly habituated with it, so therefore you need that mindfulness. So then what Venerable was saying was that when you talk about higher level of mindfulness, then for example, when you actualize the first Buddhist path, which is called path of accumulation, then there you have these practices of maintaining 4 types of mindfulnesses with regard to your body, to your feeling, to your mind, and to the phenomena. So in this case, the purpose of maintaining such mindfulness is that when you talk about maintaining mindfulness of your body, means to remember that your body is subject to death and decay, that in its basic nature it's really impure, so that you are able to remove attachment to your body, so that you are able to remove obsession with your body. Similarly, in the case of feeling, it's because of the feeling that we are always sometimes up, sometimes down. So there also, if you see the nature of the feeling, that will also help you, bring you on the right path. Similarly, in the case of the mind is fluctuating, it is impermanent. In the case of the phenomena, there's no phenomena which has independent or intrinsic existence. So if you're able to focus on this kind of mindfulness, then you will be closer to the truth, closer to the reality, which is actually a path to enlightenment. So that is the kind of answer we are giving.
I think we're getting very close to the end of the day, and I have one last question I would ask of the group, which is one from the audience, and I'm going to read it just like it's written. It says, "No one is perfect, but in this world there are many people who get success. So how could we have to trust ourselves? Sometimes we give up so easily. How can we encourage ourselves?"
I used to have a friend, I used to argue with him. And he says, "How come, Geshe-la, you always have to have the final word?" What we are looking for is happiness and peace, which is an internal state of the mind, which we discussed already. It's really not so much about how many friends you have, how much money you have, how big is your building, and so forth. So you do not need everything that every other people possesses or have. You need to make sure that you are okay in your own state. So you need to have some kind of balance. That is, I think, one of the area of our discussion. I'm glad that we touched on that. So balance. One, that with a positive mind, you should always take the available opportunity to move forward. That's also important. But not to the cost of killing yourself by doing those things which you are unable to do and feeling miserable by not being able to do. So try your best and then be satisfied. As Shantideva says, it's not me now, it's Shantideva who is going to have the last word. So Shantideva says, if it is something you can change, do not worry because you can change. If it is something you cannot change, no use worrying because by worrying you can't change it. So the happiness is state of kind of how you see things. It's how you see things, really. Most of the problem that we get is because we are unable to appreciate what we have. In many of my talks, sometimes I ask people the same thing. Then they say, Geshe-la, we live in a poor country. There's nothing I have to appreciate. Then I tell them, no, you're not true. You have both the eyes intact? Yes, sir. You have both the hands intact? Yes, sir. You have both the legs intact? Yes, sir. What else you need? Compare the things that you have physically right now to those who are blind, who are without hands, who are without legs. Just by comparing that, you will feel happy. I'm so lucky. So therefore, first of all, the way to become happy and understand your success is think about all those things that you have and many others who don't have what you have.